The first time I realized complete strangers thought they had more rights to my property than I did, I honestly thought I was imagining it. The second time, I got annoyed. By the third week, I was standing at my kitchen window every morning with a cup of coffee in my hand, watching people carve a road straight through my front yard like they were paying taxes on it. And the craziest part? Most of them looked completely comfortable doing it. No hesitation, no guilt, no glance toward the house. Just a quick turn of the wheel, a bounce across my grass, and right back onto the road. Like they had been doing it forever. My name is Ethan Walker, and about 4 years ago, I bought what I thought was my dream house just outside a small town called Fairmont Ridge, about 40 minutes north of Nashville. Nothing fancy, just a quiet corner lot with a white porch, a detached garage, and a big stretch of green lawn wrapping around the side of the property. After 20 years working construction, I and Oppos, D finally saved enough money to buy a place that actually felt like mine. Not the bank and Oppos, S. Not a landlord and Oppos, S. Mine. The previous owner was an older widower named Harold who had lived there nearly 30 years. During closing, he shook my hand and smiled. End quote. Take care of that yard, end quote, he told me. End quote. That and Oppos. That's what made me fall in love with this place, end quote. I remember laughing. At the time, I thought he was joking. Turns out he wasn't, and Oppos. T. The lawn became my favorite part of the property. Every Saturday morning I and Oppos, D mow it myself. Didn't and Oppos, T matter if it was 98 degrees outside. Didn't and Oppos, T matter if I had other things to do. There was something satisfying about watching neat green lines appear behind the mower. My neighbors got used to seeing me out there. Some would wave. Some would stop and talk. A retired schoolteacher named Martha lived across the street and used to joke that I spent more time taking care of my grass than most people spent raising their children. Maybe she wasn't, and Oppos, T completely wrong. Life was simple back then. Work during the week. Barbecue on weekends. Occasional football games with friends. Nothing dramatic. Nothing worth turning into a YouTube story. Then traffic started getting worse. A new shopping center opened about 2 miles away. Then a medical office complex. Then another housing development. Within a year, the once quiet intersection beside my house became one of the busiest spots in town during rush hour. Every morning cars stacked up at the traffic light. Every evening the same thing. At first I barely noticed. Traffic wasn't, and Oppos, T my problem. People could sit at red lights all day for all I cared. Then one Tuesday morning I saw a silver SUV leave the pavement. The driver cut across the corner of my lawn and rejoined the road 20 feet ahead. I remember staring for a second. End quote. End quote. That was it. No anger. No outrage. Just confusion. It seemed weird enough that I mentioned it to Martha later that afternoon. She shrugged. End quote. People are impatient. End quote. That explanation made sense. At least then. A week later I saw another car do it. Then another. Then two in the same morning. At that point I figured maybe drivers were following GPS directions or making mistakes. I wanted to believe there was some innocent explanation. Because the alternative was harder to accept. The alternative was that people knew exactly what they were doing. And they simply didn't, and Oppos, T care. One morning before work, I happened to leave the house a little later than usual. As I backed out of my driveway, a black pickup truck rolled directly across my grass less than 20 feet in front of me. I slammed the brakes. The driver looked right at me. Actually looked directly into my windshield. Then he lifted 2 fingers from the steering wheel like we were old friends and kept going. That moment stuck with me. Not because he damaged anything. Because of the attitude. The casual entitlement. The assumption that whatever belonged to someone else was available for his convenience. That evening I walked the yard and noticed something I hadn't, and Oppos, T paid attention to before. The grass wasn't, and Oppos, T springing back. A faint track had started forming. Nothing dramatic yet. Just a slightly darker line cutting through the corner section. Like a path somebody had walked too many times. I stood there looking at it as the sun went down and felt a strange little knot form in my stomach. Because deep down I knew what was happening. And I knew exactly where it was headed. Over the next month things escalated fast. What started as 1 or 2 vehicles became dozens. Every morning around 7:30. Every evening around 5. The same pattern. The same curve. The same shortcut. Drivers discovered that cutting through my property could save them maybe 15 seconds at the traffic light. Apparently 15 seconds was worth destroying somebody else and Oppos' yard. One afternoon, I decided to test something. I sat on the porch with a notebook. For 40 minutes, I counted every vehicle that crossed the grass. 23. 23 vehicles. In 40 minutes. I remember laughing. Not because it was funny. Because the number sounded ridiculous. Nobody would believe it if I told them. That night I called the city. The woman I spoke with was polite enough. She listened, asked a few questions, then explained there wasn't oppos. Much they could do because the vehicles weren't and oppos. Staying on public property. They were entering private property. My private property. Which meant enforcement was basically my responsibility. I thanked her and hung up. Then sat at the kitchen table staring at the wall. It felt backwards somehow. People were damaging my property. Yet somehow fixing the problem was entirely on me. The next weekend, I bought decorative landscaping stones. Big ones. Heavy enough that I nearly threw my back out unloading them. I lined them carefully along the corner where cars usually entered. For about 3 days, it worked. Then somebody moved one. Then another. A week later, I found 2 stones shoved into a drainage ditch nearby. That and oppos. When frustration started turning into something else. Because accidents dawn and oppos. Move landscaping. People do. A few days later, I installed wooden stakes connected by bright yellow rope. Nothing aggressive. Just enough to signal that this wasn't oppos. A shortcut. The rope lasted 2 mornings. The stakes lasted 4. By Friday afternoon, they were snapped, flattened, and scattered across the grass. Martha walked over while I was cleaning up the mess. She looked at the broken stakes, then looked at me. End quote. You okay? End quote. I forced a smile. End quote. Depends how much jail time property defense gets these days. End quote. She laughed. I wasn't oppos. Entirely joking. Because by then it wasn't oppos. About grass anymore. It wasn't oppos. Even about money. It was about respect. Or the complete lack of it. Every day, I watched strangers decide their convenience mattered more than my boundaries. And every day, they got a little bolder. A little more comfortable. A little more convinced nobody was going to stop them. What I didn't oppos. Realize yet was that one particular driver was about to push things further than anyone else. And when he did, everything changed. It started with one car that just didn't seem to care about anything. Not the stakes, not the rope, not the stones, not even the subtle line of freshly mown grass I'd left as a natural border. It was a beat-up white sedan, older than me, with a dent on the passenger side and a bumper sticker that read, "Life's short, drive fast." I saw it approach one Monday morning, the driver easing off the pavement like clockwork. I was watching through the blinds, half dreading it, half curious, and I swear, the guy looked right at the yard as if testing me. And he just kept coming. Tires crunching lightly on the grass, bouncing over the worn line I'd been monitoring for weeks. I could see him in my mind's eye thinking, yeah, I got this, no one's watching. Then he hit the rope. Not violently, nothing catastrophic, but enough to make him jerk back, mutter something under his breath, and reverse back to the street. And I laughed. Not out loud at first, just a chuckle behind my coffee cup, because it wasn't about hurting him. It was the first sign that my frustration had an actual solution. A solution that didn't involve yelling, fines, or confrontation. I realized then the problem wasn't visibility. It wasn't signage. It wasn't a polite ask. The problem was the absence of consequence. Nobody respected the line because the line couldn't bite back. So that weekend I started planning something different. I wanted it subtle. I wanted it invisible. I didn't want anyone to look at my yard and think, ah, that's a trap. I wanted it to feel like the same yard, the same green comfort of Fairmont Ridge suburbia, but with one quiet truth buried beneath the surface. I spent Saturday walking the curved path the cars had carved. The track was clear now, flattened grass, compacted soil, a dark line cutting through the green, like the ghost of a road that didn't belong. I measured it, memorized it, and started digging. A narrow trench, just a few inches deep, following the exact curve of the tire marks. I was careful not to disturb the surrounding lawn too much, not to attract attention. Then I placed the first reinforced steel post. Short, sturdy, sunk deep enough to resist the weight of a car, but hidden under a thin layer of soil so no one would see it. I continued, one post after another, like laying a secret army in the ground. My hands were dirty, my back sore, but I felt satisfaction creeping in with every post. By mid-afternoon, the line was complete. Covered the whole path with fresh soil, smoothed it over, laid new sod across the entire strip. By the time the sun started to set, it was impossible to tell anything had changed. The lawn looked untouched, pristine, as if it had never seen tires. I stepped back and imagined Monday morning. I imagined the first car, same old line, same boldness, meeting resistance. Monday came with that low humidity, golden light kind of morning that makes you almost forget your problems for a second. I was on the porch, coffee in hand, waiting. 7:30 exactly. The white sedan appeared, engine humming softly, cruising past the stop sign like it owned the world. The driver leaned slightly, turned the wheel, and rolled onto my grass. I held my breath. The tires hit the first steel post. The car shuddered just enough to stop the driver mid-motion. No crash, no loud bang, just a pause. Hesitation. I could see him tightening his grip on the wheel, muttering, "What the hell?" under his breath. Then, slowly, carefully, he backed up and returned to the road. I felt a thrill, something like a mix of victory and relief, because I hadn't had to say a word. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't called the cops. The ground had done the talking. By mid-morning, 3 more cars tried. Same result. By the 5th attempt, I could see drivers slowing before they even touched the lawn, some inching forward like cats testing a new territory, then quickly backing off. The confidence was gone. That familiar swagger had vanished. It was subtle, almost cinematic, seeing someone who thought they were entitled to a shortcut suddenly uncertain, guessing, adjusting, reconsidering. I remember leaning against the porch railing, a little proud, a little smug, thinking, finally, maybe they'll learn. Over the next week, the number of attempts dwindled to 0. The lawn returned to silence. No crunching tires, no flattened grass, no imprint of someone else's arrogance. It was almost surreal how quickly the problem vanished when there was actual consequence. What had once been worn dirt became perfect green again, like it had been before the world decided it was a road. During this period, I couldn't help but notice the psychology unfolding. Some drivers lingered longer than others, peering over the grass, trying to figure out why the cars before them had stopped. Some whispered curses or shook their heads. One kid in a beat-up sedan even rolled his window down and muttered, "Guess we're not cutting through anymore," as if saying it out loud might reclaim some dignity. And I realized something about human behavior that I hadn't fully appreciated before. People respect boundaries when boundaries are enforced invisibly, when there's no shame in the confrontation, but the moment it hurts, even a little, the sense of entitlement evaporates. That satisfaction, it was quiet, invisible to anyone but me, yet somehow deeply gratifying. Martha noticed too. She walked by midweek, nodding at the yard. "Seems like everyone's behaving," she said, sipping her iced tea. I smiled, shrugged. I didn't have to tell them twice. Even so, it wasn't just the physical solution that felt good. It was the mental payoff, the sense that I had quietly claimed authority over my own property without escalating into conflict, without public spectacle, without anyone knowing exactly how it happened. It was clever, subtle, clean, and it made me reflect on a larger truth about community, about entitlement, about how people view shared versus private space. People often assume convenience trumps ownership, that their need to get ahead outweighs someone else's peace or property, and most of the time, it's just ignored. But when the invisible becomes tangible, when respect is demanded without confrontation, everything shifts. The intersection returned to calm. Traffic flowed naturally. People waited at the light again. And my lawn, my beautiful, painstakingly maintained lawn, healed completely, smooth as a painted canvas. And still, I thought about the white sedan, the other pickup trucks, the SUVs, each one a small character in this little drama. Each one a test of patience, a test of strategy, a test of resolve. Each one taught me more about the quiet power of consequence. And the kicker? Nobody ever knew what happened. No one called the cops, no one argued. Just the ground and me, negotiating in silence, enforcing a boundary they had refused to respect, and learning just how far a little ingenuity can go when you're left to defend your own space. By the end of that month, the shortcut didn't just disappear, it evaporated, leaving nothing behind but green grass and a sense of control that felt almost luxurious, if you'll forgive the indulgence. I'd sit on the porch, sipping coffee, watching the morning light spill across the lawn, and for the first time in weeks, I could breathe a little easier. My yard belonged to me again. And the best part? The lesson was carried out without confrontation, without violence, and without anyone realizing they'd been corrected. It's strange the way these small acts reveal bigger truths. That the problem wasn't just cars. It wasn't just impatience. It wasn't even just disrespect. It was a pattern, a mindset, a habit that grew unchecked until someone, quietly, carefully, intervened. And in the weeks that followed, I watched the neighborhood adjust. Drivers hesitated, some slowed, even on the pavement, some lingered at the light a little longer than usual. It was subtle, but it was real. And I realized that sometimes, the best way to change behavior isn't to argue, or shame, or escalate. It's to create an environment where the choice to do wrong simply doesn't work. And when that happens, people self-correct, often without ever knowing why. And that quiet observation, the way the world changes without noise, well, that became my favorite part of the whole experience. But not everything was neat and predictable. I couldn't shake the thought that if one person discovered the steel posts and chose to push back, what would happen then? What if someone had a really aggressive car, or someone with a grudge? That tension lingered, a reminder that even clever solutions have limits, and even peaceful victories carry a shadow of uncertainty. That's where the story really gets interesting, the kind of detail people miss when they just hear, "Oh yeah, I stopped people from driving on my lawn." Because the truth is, I didn't just stop them physically. I sent a message, subtle but unmistakable, about respect, consequence, and the unspoken rules of space. And that's when I knew I had to be careful, precise, and patient. Because with human behavior, patience and subtlety often achieve what yelling and confrontation never could. By the time the weekend rolled around again, the lawn was completely restored, the posts invisible beneath the surface, and the story, at least to the public, was over. But in my mind, it was just entering the climax, the part where everything I'd done would meet the ultimate test. The next Monday morning, first car on the grass, first real encounter with the invisible barrier, and the silent, cinematic payoff I had been imagining for weeks. The rest of the story, well, that's where it gets satisfying, cinematic, and maybe a little controversial. Because when people assume they own something that isn't theirs, the lesson they get can either be messy or elegant. And I chose elegance. The funny thing about winning a battle quietly is that most people never realize there was a battle in the first place. A few weeks after the shortcut disappeared, life started feeling normal again. The traffic light backed cars up every morning, just like it always had. People waited their turn. The grass grew thicker. The worn dirt path faded until it looked like it had never existed. From the outside, nothing remarkable had happened. But every now and then I and Apos catch myself standing at the kitchen window, coffee in hand, looking at that corner of the yard and remembering what it used to be. Not because I missed the conflict, because I was still trying to understand it. Why had so many people felt comfortable crossing a line they knew wasn't Apos? Theirs. Why did something as simple as a lawn suddenly become public property in their minds? And maybe the bigger question, how many things in life become acceptable simply because nobody stops them? One Monday morning, about a month after everything settled down, I got part of my answer. I was heading out to work when I noticed a pickup truck stopped near the intersection. Not moving, just sitting there. The driver eventually pulled into the shoulder and climbed out. And I recognized him immediately. The black pickup. The guy who had looked directly at me that morning and casually waved while driving across my property. He walked toward the corner of the lawn slowly, studying it, looking around, then looking down, like he was trying to solve a puzzle. I stayed near my truck and watched. After a minute, he spotted me. For a second, neither of us said anything. Then he nodded toward the grass. End quote. What in Apos do you do? End quote. I almost laughed. Not because the question was funny. Because after months of entitlement, frustration, and aggravation, that was the first genuine curiosity I and Apos seen from any of them. I shrugged. End quote. Nothing. End quote. He smirked. End quote. Yeah, right. End quote. I smiled. End quote. Maybe people finally learned how traffic lights work. End quote. For a moment, I thought he might get annoyed. Instead, he started laughing. A real laugh. The kind that catches you by surprise. Then he shook his head. End quote. Whatever you did, it worked. End quote. And with that, he got back in his truck and drove away. That conversation lasted maybe 30 seconds. But it stuck with me. Because there was no argument, no accusation, no threat, no demand for explanation, just a quiet acknowledgement that something had changed. And maybe, deep down, he understood exactly why. A few days later, Martha stopped by while I was mowing. She stood at the edge of the driveway watching me make another pass. End quote. You know, end quote, she said, end quote. The neighborhood and Oppos has been talking, end quote. I groaned, end quote. That and Oppos S never good, end quote. She laughed, end quote. Oh, it and Oppos S harmless. Everybody and Oppos S trying to figure out what happened, end quote. I shut off the mower, end quote. And what are the theories, end quote. She started counting on her fingers, end quote. Hidden cameras, end quote. I nodded, end quote. Creative, end quote. End quote. Motion sensors, end quote. End quote. Fancy, end quote. End quote. Underground concrete, end quote. End quote. Expensive, end quote. She paused, then grinned, end quote. My personal favorite is that you buried old railroad tracks under there, end quote. I nearly dropped the mower handle laughing. For the next few minutes, she told me every rumor making its way around the neighborhood. And the entire time, I never corrected a single one. Because honestly, the mystery was doing half the work. People are far less likely to repeat behavior when they dawn and Oppos to understand why it failed the first time. The uncertainty becomes part of the deterrent. And over time, the story took on a life of its own. New neighbors moved in. Old neighbors retold the tale. The shortcut became one of those strange local legends that gets passed around during backyard barbecues and community events. End quote. Don and Oppos T drive across Ethan and Oppos S lawn. End quote. Why? Nobody seemed completely sure. They just knew better. Months turned into a year. Then another. The grass remained perfect. The intersection remained orderly. And eventually I stopped thinking about it every day. Life moved forward. Work got busier. Friends got married. People had kids. The normal stuff. Yet every so often someone would bring it up. Usually after hearing a version of the story from somebody else. And they and Oppos D always asked the same question. End quote. Do you feel bad about it? End quote. That and Oppos S the part that still interests me. Because the answer ISN and Oppos T is simple as people expect. Do I feel bad that drivers had to wait at a traffic light instead of cutting across someone else and Oppos S property? No, not really. Do I feel bad that I forced them to respect a boundary they had ignored? Not particularly. But do I sometimes wonder if there was a friendlier way to solve the problem? Sure. Maybe there was. Maybe if I and Oppos D talked to enough people. Maybe if the city had stepped in. Maybe if every driver had suddenly developed perfect manners overnight. A lot of things are possible. The reality is that none of those things happened. What happened was simpler. People kept taking advantage of a situation because nothing discouraged them from doing it. Then one day that changed, and the behavior changed with it. That and Oppos S not revenge, at least not the way I see it. Revenge is about making someone suffer. This wasn't an Oppos T that. Nobody got hurt. Nobody got fined. Nobody got embarrassed on social media. Nobody even knew exactly what happened. All I did was remove the reward. And once the reward disappeared, so did the behavior. Honestly, that and Oppos is probably the biggest lesson I took from the entire experience. Not just about property, about people. We spend a lot of time arguing with bad behavior, explaining why it and Oppos is wrong, asking politely for it to stop, hoping reason wins. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it doesn't and Oppos T. But when incentives change, behavior often changes faster than arguments ever could. That lesson has followed me into every part of life since then. Work, relationships, community, even parenting advice I and Oppos V given friends. Boundaries aren't and Oppos T really boundaries if they only exist when everyone agrees with them. A real boundary works even when somebody wants to cross it. And maybe that and Oppos S why this story still gets reactions whenever I tell it. Some people hear it and think it was brilliant. Others think it was petty. A few think I should and Oppos V gone further. And some think I should and Oppos V done less. Honestly, I understand all of those opinions. Because depending on how you look at it, the story can mean different things. Is it about protecting property? Standing up for yourself? Teaching respect? Or is it about people becoming too comfortable taking small advantages until somebody finally says enough? Maybe it and Oppos S all of those things. Maybe it and Oppos. S none. What I know for certain is this. Every morning when I look out my kitchen window now, I see exactly what Harold saw when he sold me the house years ago. A clean stretch of green grass. A quiet corner. A home that feels like mine. And sometimes I think about that handshake during closing. And quote, take care of that yard, end quote. Turns out he was right. Not because grass is important. Because some things deserve protecting, even when other people Don and Oppos, T understand why. Now here and Oppos. S what I and Oppos, D love to know from you. If you were in my position, what would you have done? Would you have handled it the same way? Would you have called the city, installed cameras, built a fence, confronted the drivers directly? Or do you think what I did crossed a line? Drop your thoughts in the comments because I and Oppos am genuinely curious where people stand on this. And if you and Oppos, VE ever dealt with neighbors, strangers, or even your own community ignoring boundaries until consequences showed up, share your story too. Sometimes the most interesting part ISN and Oppos, T what happened. It and Oppos, S whether people think it was justice or just a smarter version of revenge.